Hey guys, I'm back. It's Gary. Halloween time, my favorite time of year, autumn. And I think I'd mentioned in my last video that I was going to do a couple Halloween themed videos. And after which, we've only got a couple weeks till Halloween. And after that, I'll get back to more normal stuff. I'm absolutely risking making myself look like a fool here. This is one of those, I think, unusual, unique things. I think everybody in the VC has some interests that are of their own, that are limited extremely to very few people. And my love of Halloween goes, back to the time when I was a kid, and the imagery and all the stuff that comes with it. And so I've got a few things that I'm going to do two videos. And this is non-musical stuff, and then I'm going to do a video of musical Halloween stuff. So this is probably the more silly one, And I definitely have a lot, well, not a lot, some things that are definitely maybe oriented more toward kids, which brings out the kid in me. But a lot of it, I don't know, even when it's marketed at times to kids, it's not necessarily for kids, specifically. I only have a couple LPs going back in the old days. It wasn't, well, when I was a little kid, 10 or so, as much as I was into Halloween, I don't remember, well, I didn't have the money either, but I don't remember seeing much Halloween-themed stuff in the record stores. They probably did put out some. They probably had some of those sound effects albums or something like that. I'm sure they did, but I think it's just a question of maybe I didn't. I never thought to look for them. Actually, I saw a lot of them in the back of Famous Monsters magazine, which I used to read when I was a kid. That was mail order stuff strictly. Most of that was old radio shows, as opposed to Halloween-specific things. And I never had enough money to order those things. But I don't recall ever going into a record store, not that I went to a lot before I could drive. I was pretty much limited to a very small record department that was in a department store close to where I lived prior to, say, being a teenager. I don't recall ever seeing any Halloween-themed stuff there, but, it could be just I didn't happen to go there a couple weeks before, 2-3 weeks before Halloween, when they would have put it out. Actually, the first thing that I ever bought that I guess would be Halloween-themed in terms of non-musical stuff that's an album was this Ghost Stories. Famous Ghost Stories. Ooh, with scary sounds. Look at that price. $3.77. I got this in the early 70s. I think I figured it out, and I don't know how I figured it out, but around 73 or so, I bought this in Musicland. I don't know. Musicland was a chain. I don't know how much in the country, how far through the country it got, and it was only one small store that was inside the tiniest mall around. But this. Still, I haven't played it, but I like it enough. It's mostly ghost stories, and there is one silly one that's definitely oriented toward kids, but the rest are very short, like 4 or 5 minutes versions of very well-known stories: Telltale Heart, Headless Horseman, The Hitchhiker, that kind of thing, and just a lot of fun. Not necessarily not oriented toward kids, but not necessarily a kids thing. There's the back cover, kind of cartoonish, like a horror magazine would have been. It's weird because I just realized it's on the Pickwick label, Mr. Pickwick. And this was an interesting kind of. I know, I actually have some jazz compilations on the Pickwick label. But it seems like they did kind of oddball specialty stuff in addition to music. It's weird. This is the only album I think I ever bought that didn't come in any kind of protective paper sleeve or anything. And I'm sure that I would have left, no matter how ratty it was, I would have left it in the paper sleeve if it existed. So it's kind of weird. It's the only album I ever bought that didn't come with some kind of sleeve to protect it. But then again, it was $3.77, new, sealed. Oddly enough, this is one of those things for no reason at all. I remember buying. I could, to this day, I could go into that little mall, which essentially was torn down and rebuilt. But if it was still there, I could go and point out the exact store location where this record shop was. And I think I was walking by the record shop, and I think this was actually out on the display, this little display rack. And I'm like, you know what? I know it's silly, because I was maybe 13 when I got this. I know it's silly, but I gotta have that. And of course, at this time, you didn't have video cassettes, and video cassettes didn't exist or anything like that. So you had no choice of programming. Records and books were it. So if you could find something that interested you, that was a program, that was a non-musical program, the concept of being able to, wow, this is great, I can play this anytime I want. The only other LP I have, I got this at Sam Goody, I'm pretty sure. Another chain, that was a big chain that was gone, was, and this was one of the things I think I actually saw on the back of Famous Monsters magazine. I could hear everybody tuning out. Don't worry, I will eventually get back to the music, guys. Here's a Lights Out thing, and I knew what Lights Out was. It was an old radio show. Sure, my dad, it was from my dad's time. He knows about it, and he probably would have heard it at the time. And it's just, it's a recording of the radio show, Murder Castle. You can read August 3, 1943. I think this is, picturing people, sitting around the radio, because in 43 people didn't have televisions, and listening to programs like you would watch a television series today. So there's some more some other stories on here. Oh, it's interesting. I just read this. All our records, it says, I know I got glare there. All our records are 1 full hour of programming. Pretty much a lot for an LP. So there's this Murder Castle. I guess the shows were about a half hour. The Witch's Tale, which is 1939, Program 2, 4 Fingers and a Thumb. It looks like there's 4 different things. And there's an extra Boris Karloff in The Babysitter, broadcast September 12th, 1948, which would have been, boy, I haven't even opened this for a long time. You know what? I'm pretty sure, I don't know if all these individual stories are available. I'm fairly sure that a couple, some of them would be. Probably the ones with more of the Boris Karloff with a known actor. This album's from 1973. I pretty much would have bought it within a couple of years of it coming out. There's I haven't even opened this for how many years. Welcome to the golden age of radio. Remember, this whole company is based on just recreating. Thank you for buying this radio record. Radio Yesteryear. Well, Radio Yesteryear was around until in Connecticut until at least just a few years ago. They may still exist, but oddly enough, I don't know if this album in this exact format with these 4 stories on here or so. I don't know if this has been reissued in this specific, all 4 stories. But I'm willing to bet that some of these stories can be had nowadays digitally or on CD or whatever. That's it for records. God, I don't know where to start. Where do I start? Well, okay, since we're already on the old... Well, I grabbed the wrong pile. I'm just going to go with what I grabbed. The next thing is this really isn't kids-oriented stuff, the next batch of things. I don't even know how I found out about some of these. I know what these all on. Classic Tales of Horror. This is actually a 3 CD set that retails for $9.95. About 3.5 hours. All not all well-known stories, but these are people reading classic ghost stories. Robert Bloch stories performed by Robert Forster, Louise Sorel, who's an actress that I've heard of. Let me see, David Drake, Ray Bradbury story. So there's over an hour each. These are Robert Bloch, who I said, Ray Bradbury. Yes, these are. I'm sure these were just short stories that existed in books, before somebody went in and got a few actors to read these, and that's what this next batch is pretty much. The classical, mainly classical, I guess, Naxos, Naxos record label. They do some jazz, I guess. Largely known for classical, has an audiobooks section, and these are really good, but very serious. This is not. Kids would definitely lose interest in this very quick. They have classic, chilling tales. These are really kind of worth the price. They're the whole series. I think there's 4 or 5 of them now. Pretty sure there's at least 4. Are all 2 CD sets, and they push up toward 80 minutes on each CD. They really fill out each CD with stories. Classic, old stories, read by all. It seems like they're all British actors, and not people that I'm familiar with. But I think a lot of these guys are actually more stage actors than film actors. Dermot Kerrigan. This guy's an Irish actor. Worked in Shakespeare theater. So what stories are on here? Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart, which is a story that's done on just practically every story-oriented CD like this. Rudyard Kipling, M.R. James, ghost story writer. O. Henry. A lot of stories like that. Very seriously done. Most of these actors don't just read them; they kind of act out the parts, which makes it, almost more like the old radio plays, like the old radio shows, like the Lights Out shows, where they were acting the parts out. So I like it both ways. Sometimes when they just read them flat, I'm fine with that. It seems like all these, and I have 3 volumes of these, and it's incredible because almost all of the CDs really bump up against the 80-minute running time. Volume 2, stories by Oscar Wilde, Edgar Allan Poe, M.R. James again, Charles Dickens, Ambrose Bierce, another stage actor, Anthony Donovan, works in the UK, mostly plays, and they do a good job. They do a good job with these. I think there may be some introductory classical music before the stories start. I haven't spun one of these. I have them in my computer, and I will play them because it's the season. But I haven't listened to them this season yet. And here's the 3rd volume. Comes in a little slipcase, this one. I think there's a 4th volume. And again, they're very worthwhile in terms of, if you like this kind of thing, and because of the length, these are really good for a trip. Or if you have a long drive to or from work, especially if you work at night, all the better. Again, Ambrose Bierce, J.S. LaFawn, B.M. Crocker, who I'm not familiar with, but there's a, classic, most of these, ghost stories were written, very, very, very long time ago. So I have the 3 volumes. I like the covers too. Very well, very professionally done. The stories can be quite long, so I don't necessarily think kids would lose interest because there's no visual image. So that's really more for adults, I guess. Getting back to what I was trying to grab last time, I do have another. This isn't really a horror Halloween one as much, but just to move that Lights Out stuff, which is from the album that I showed, apparently is available on CD. here's a Lights Out, the only one that I have on CD. More of a mystery thing, I guess. But you know, when you hear the old, and you know, of course, the audio quality from these recordings is going to be mono and kind of scratchy stuff. Actually enhances it because it's not, you know, it's not music, so you're not worried so much about fidelity. But you know, you listen to these and you just picture, wow, you know, 1942s are from 1942, 1943. Even I wasn't around then, but you know, people actually in the evening sitting around the radio and just digging these things and listening to them and just getting all caught up in them kind of brings back a memory of a time that you could probably see it by watching old movies, you know, on TV and get a flavor for the period. Here's another set, Classic Tales of Terror, that looks like it may be just another thing of people reading stories, but this also consists of 3 CDs of radio shows again. So, the werewolf, a story about the werewolf. I know they actually use pictures from the old, mostly the old Universal horror movies, which totally unrelated to this, but story about a werewolf, so they have a picture of the Wolfman, but it's from 1944, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1945. These are again, this is from a radio show called The Weird Circle, which aired from 1943 through 1947 over the Mutual Broadcast System. These are all about an hour long each. So the original story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on that one, the werewolf, an adaptation of Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein. There's actually, this is interesting. When was this from? I guess this is from the same radio show. Does it say in here? It doesn't actually say which specific radio show this broadcast on. Oh yeah, I heard on the first one is Weird Circle, which is the program. I guess the Frankenstein one is from Weird Circle, broadcast probably live. They didn't do too much tape stuff. If you can imagine that, doing all this acting live. February 20, 1944. That would have been from that Weird Circle program. And then there's another Frankenstein adaptation on here from 1955. So 11 years later, on a radio show called Suspense. The program did another adaptation of the famous story, and that was on a show called Suspense on CBS Radio, June 1955, which is probably the most current of the batch, I think. 1955, and most people still didn't even have TV then anyway. And here's an adaptation of Dracula with Orson Welles from the Mercury Theater on the Air was the name of the program. And this must have been a long adaptation because that's the only thing on here. It's the only track on here. So, and that's a picture of Klaus Kinski from Nosferatu. But here's a Dracula story. I think it runs about an hour, so it's I guess it was a longer show that they did here. And Orson Welles selected Bram Stoker's Dracula for the premiere broadcast of his legendary radio series, The Mercury Theater on the Air. Okay, so Orson Welles, it was actually Orson Welles' program, I guess. And that was July 11th, 1938. Wow, 1938. Who, you know, the thing that amazes me is who thought to record these and save these, because I'm fairly sure that these were, and that's the whole box, I'm pretty sure that these were all done live radio broadcasts, and they didn't do too many reruns back then. So even if they recorded them, it wasn't necessarily with the thought of doing a rebroadcast, I don't think. So it's incredible that these survived. Nobody would think that there would be necessarily a market for selling these when people could tune in and get them for free. That was the mindset back then. But nowadays, you can record and potentially save just about anything, including dumb YouTube videos. The last batch, which is a substantial size, are things that I picked up because I couldn't resist them. But here's where the silly stuff gets mixed in. And you might look at me and say, maybe you should see a doctor for buying some of this stuff. And some of these I can't even. I must have gotten very, very cheaply. The first batch of things are definitely things geared towards kids, but I couldn't avoid them. I tend not to buy the sound effects things because they're not going to get a lot of plays. They're just sound effects. I think I mentioned in my last video. On the cable system, I have Music Choice, which has a channel which plays seasonal music, and at this time of year, it plays Halloween music, and I have it on the TV right now, as a matter of fact. And they mix in things of sound effects, so if I desperately needed to hear them, I could always record them off the air. But they're just sound effects, So I tend to avoid those, and yet somehow some of them got mixed in here anyway. This one I must have gotten cheaply, but I couldn't resist. It's very silly. Around the Fire with Uncle Guts. Now, if that doesn't spell out like 10-year-old boy, nothing does. But it is a bunch of ghost stories, as opposed to sound effects. Rather silly. A lot of these less expensive ones come in these cardboard cases. And what can I say? It's a bunch of rather silly narrated. I haven't played it this year yet. Narrated by a guy pretending to be Uncle Guts, I guess, and tells the stories. Rather silly. And some of these I just saw in the stores back 15 years or so ago, when stores were record stores were more prominent, and they would put out seasonal things. Because they were already in competition with online shopping, but there's nothing like a deadline. You're going to put these CDs out for Halloween. Maybe you'll get some sales from them because if people are going to buy them on the internet, the season might be over before they arrive in the mail, whatever. So I got this Tales from the Tomb. Obviously, you can see because of the glare, but the guy's eyes light up a little bit. You can't really tell from the glare. A bunch of ghost stories, probably. Maybe a little kid-oriented, but still enjoyable. Not overly silly. This is fun. Halloween's Greatest Stories by Edgar Allan Poe. Again, fairly. You look at the cover; it certainly looks like a kid's thing. But it's got 4 stories, and the last track is called Scary Places, Sound Effects and Music. So without even trying to, I end up with some stuff that is sound effects. Then I bought this one, Tales from Beyond. And I think I bought this one online, because what it is this entire CD. It's a reissue of this entire CD, including the sound effects track. And so it's got the 4 stories, the sound effects track, and they added in 4 different tracks from an album called Monster Mix, which is a sound effects album. So again, I end up with some sound effects stuff that I wouldn't have bought on its own. And some of these things from the Monster Mix CD album are things like Lunatic Laughter, Demon Dogs, Hungry Ghouls, Storms in the Night, are actually the kind of thing that I hear on the Music Choice cable channel that plays the sounds of the season, the October Halloween stuff. So it's the entire, a couple years after this CD came out, they basically repackaged it with all of the contents of the first CD I just showed you, and 4 tracks from a sound effects CD, kind of thrown on the end. But I still like it. Here's another one, obviously, maybe I shouldn't say maybe. oriented toward kids, the old gray goose. No, that's not me on there. Again, stories with sound effects. Obviously, this is probably more along the line of an Uncle Guts thing that I showed you. I don't remember this at all. I have to be honest. But the interesting thing with this one is that it's all stories, and it starts with an introduction and ends with a farewell. So it's kind of like I guess this guy telling these stories. The nice thing is it's not, for once, adaptions of the same old Edgar Allan Poe telltale horror stories. All these seem to be original stories. They're I don't recall, and I will listen to it, but I haven't listened to it for a while. I'm sure they're not brilliantly written things, but for once they're actually a story on here called Shipwreck, Medical College, The Graveyard, The Ride of Terror of the Butcher. So it's I'm sure it's a little silly, but at least it's original stuff. It's not adaptations of the classics, which there are a lot of out there, which I have a lot of. So that's really, 1999. That's probably around the time I bought it. I got to play this because I have very little recollection of it. Another rather silly one: A Night in the Haunted House, A Night in the Graveyard. Again, these were stories. I thought they were stories, but I don't. In the end, I think it's primarily a sound effects record with narration. A little bit. There's something called Entering the Haunted House. So I think somebody talks about walking into a haunted house, and then you hear a bunch of haunted house sounds. The mad organist, So I think it's somebody walking around, kind of introducing each thing as they come to it, and then you'll hear the mad organist play. Bats in the Belfry, Laboratory, all that. It's not. I think when I ordered it, not what I thought it was. So this is one that's basically sound effects with an introduction to each one, kind of. Not a. I thought it was a story thing, and I'm such a sucker for story things. Woo! Very scary. Very scary. Don't know why I bought this one. This is obviously oriented toward kids. Kids' Halloween scary stories and spooky songs. I'm not that interested in spooky songs. And I don't recall them, but apparently there was some stories on here, and again, they're original stories. They're not retellings of classic stories. It certainly didn't become a favorite. So my recollection of it, I just probably couldn't, for the price I paid for it. I'm sure I couldn't say no. And this was, I'm pretty sure I got this at a party store. Like the Party City, the Party Box, all those kind of things. They have these things seasonally, and some of them you can't get anywhere else. I'll show some of those in a little bit. Again, here's another one. I don't know why I bought this one. Demonic Soundscapes. Nice cover. Looks like an old comic book. But it's basically Robert J. Walsh. His name pops up on quite a few of these, the rather sillier ones. Introduction to the Horrific. 8 audio scenes of terror. Yeah, this is another one. I think there's somebody introducing kind of scenarios and scenes, and then just special effects and sound effects play out. I think I played it once. Would I get rid of it? No. But, how often I listen to it is another one. Now, this one probably is familiar to anybody that watches my channel. This is an all-time favorite, Ghost Gallery. This is a blast. This is just a fun, not a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe stories or classic stories, all original for the most part. Stories, or actually factoids in some cases, written by Tom Willett, the actor, musician, who wrote the stories, did the narration, voiceover, and actually did the music himself. It's a little, little background, early digital synthesizer background music. But Tom Willett has a great channel under the name Feature Man. It's got thousands of videos up. Been doing it for years, and pretty much posts every day something. And eventually, it took me a long time. I bought this. I didn't know who Tom Willett was. The booklet talks about him being an actor on shows that mostly I haven't seen. I actually did see one of his movies that he was in, but I wasn't really familiar with who he was. Great guy, great, incredible sense of humor, talented guy too. And this was really my introduction to him, and I loved this for years and wondered who Tom was and tried to track down some information on him for years. And it wasn't until I discovered YouTube that I found his channel many years after I bought this. This is just a bunch of stories. Well, I put them all up on my channel so you can hear them. Just Tom reading a bunch of stories. The CD doesn't specifically list a lot of credits, so when I found Tom's YouTube channel, I sent him an email. And I had the feeling that he had created the music, even though I knew nothing about him as a musician initially. Once I discovered his channel, you see him playing piano on it. But I asked him, oh, did you do the music too? And he said, yeah, I did the music as well. He did the whole thing. He wrote the stories, he read the stories. This is a fun CD. Just a bunch of stories, and some of them are true, about ghosts in the White House. Some odd things that happen to famous movie actors like Bela Lugosi and James Dean, things like that, and mixed in with stories. This one I found online. This is one of those interesting little finds, which is why sometimes I end up buying garbage, because I end up looking for little unique things like this. Charleston's Tales of Terror. So these are, supposedly stories told by a guy named Tommy Dew, D-E-W, and I guess it's all specific to things that happened, I guess in and around Charleston. The interesting thing, I know I found this online, don't recall where online, I ordered it online. After I got it, though, it was apparent that this is something that is probably sold on his tour. Apparently there's this tour that's done, and I guess especially this time of year, around the Halloween season, called On the Market Tours in Charleston, South Carolina. There's even a phone number here. So I think there's like this ghost story kind of tour of haunted areas done in around the Charleston area. And it appears to be that the CD is a product of that. You can probably go on the tour, and he probably sells the CD with the stories on it on the tour, and just decided, well, why just sell it to people that can make the tour? I'll make it available online. And I think that's where it comes from. This was, one of those little fun, unique things that I go to, that I hope to come across, like a ghost gallery. Charleston's Tales of Terror. Maybe not brilliant, but just a lot of fun. Great to listen to when you don't know what else to listen to, or a car thing. The rest of these are fairly unique because I couldn't find out very much ever about the company. All of these CDs I found in the Party Box or Party City, and obviously they're not out all year. They're these things that are just out for the Halloween season, and they're audio books. All of these were each one $1. They're all in cardboard sleeves like this. But these are a blast. It's put out by a company called Blue Diamond Audio Books, and I could never, even though the dates on these, even a couple of years after I bought them, 2005, most of these are dated, and I bought them around the time. Even online, I couldn't find anything out about this company. I don't know if they've done any other audio books besides these. These are a blast. Each CD has 2 stories on it. Most of them are classic ghost stories that are just read out by whoever, nobody famous. A little bit of music in them, almost, very similar to the old radio programs. A little bit of an introduction before they start. Who wrote the story. I think all of these are, pretty much classic stories. Not a lot different than the Naxos audiobooks, but maybe slightly less ponderously serious, maybe, and just more fun. Bram Stoker, Dracula's Guest, which was I think Bram Stoker wrote the original Dracula novel, and I think sections of it were excised because of the size and length of it. And Dracula's Guest was a whole section that was, I think, believe pulled out of the original novel of Dracula, and was big enough to eventually, I believe, be published as its own smaller book story, kind of, about Dracula. And I didn't know the story of that excised portion until I heard this. I didn't know what the story involved. Another famous story, The Grave. For $1.99, you can't go bad, and you can't go wrong. And I found, I don't know which one was the first Blue Diamond Audio book that I bought, but after I found the one and, you know, played it and realized, oh, this is good, this is done seriously, kind of. I couldn't get enough of them, and I was going to I kept on going to Party City, just, you know, picking up all these stories. These are really amongst my favorite. These and the Ghost Gallery thing. Night Terrors, When I Was Dead. Some of these stories I really didn't know the actual stories, but also an Edgar Allan Poe story. Each one has 2 stories, but the length of these varies widely. It's like somebody thought, oh, we'll just throw 2 stories on a CD. And didn't really look at the length, so some of them are like 30 minutes, and then, you know, one of them is like almost 80 minutes. It's like they should kind of look at the length of the stories and try to even it out a little bit. But these are all published stories. But oddly enough, it says audiobooks are great. Yes, they are. But I couldn't find anything about this Blue Diamond Audio book company. The Raven and The Legend of Sleepy Hollows, probably 2 of the most famous stories. Again, Blue Diamond Audio book. Pretty sure I paid $1. I know the ones that have the price sticker on them still have a $1.99 sticker. Here we go. Can you see that? $1.99. Yeah. Party Box. Midnight Shadows. Nice cover. Nathaniel Hawthorne. The Ash Tree. M.R. James. M.R. James is a very famous ghost story writer, but I don't know. I want to say, there's my phone. You know, I always feared this would happen when I was recording. Ooh. Okay. I had to hang up on them. And I'm toward the end, too. The Ash Tree. I like the stories that I don't know, because you don't know where they're going to go. So they're a lot of fun. An H.P. Lovecraft story. Now this is, I love H.P. Lovecraft stories. And this was a story that I hadn't I hadn't read prior to getting this. Not familiar at all with Robert R. Chambers. Oh, this is going to keep on. I just have to keep it. You know, these people, and they're trying to sell me stuff, I know it. $1.99. Wonderful. A few more. Horror classics, the Monkeys Paw. Very famous story. But the damn thing was not a story I was familiar with. Again, Blue Diamond Audio, 2005. They put these things out and the company seemed to disappear. Wow, these people really are going away. I can't let my answering machine pick up because the speaker for the answering machine is right by my microphone. This is a great story. One of my favorite ones, The Night Wire and Rat. I didn't know anything about H.F. Arnold, M.R. James. Oh, man. This is probably my favorite one, I think, of this batch. Night Wire is a really cool story. About somebody who works at the graveyard shift of the Newswire agency. And, you know, this is odd because it's the same company. It says Scary Story for Kids, which is the only one that's marketed to kids. But they're both, as the others are, classic ghost horror stories. and Robert Louis Stevenson, Ambrose Bierce, you know. So it's weird that they would call these scary stories for kids. I don't know that a kid's going to sit and listen to them for a half hour. You know, this is one of those that goes 75 minutes. Is a kid really going to sit and listen to it for 75 minutes? I don't know. But you know, again, these are adult stories, adult ghost stories, and that's the last one. And here, my phone is not going to stop. I think somebody died. So that's it. I went longer if I intended. Sorry for the phone ringing and interrupting at the end. I can't let my answering machine pick up. My speaker is right by my microphone. So guys, the next thing is a music-oriented Halloween typey things. So that's what I have. Sorry for the interruptions. I could probably think that if one person watching who I know who that is, and that's probably it. But that's all for now. I will be back soon with the music thing, and thanks for tuning in as always, guys. Take care.